Folks, welcome to the 4th annual Panorama. My name is Dr. Matthew Richards. I'm faculty advisor for the AppSpeaks group, the group that worked endlessly and diligently to put this event on for you today. We have a fantastic event coming up tonight. We have 8 incredible speakers giving 8 really interesting, compelling, and sharp presentations. And without the endless work and the dedication of so many people and so many groups, this wouldn't be possible. We have so many that I had to bring up my cheat sheets to just get through them all and thank them all. First, we want to thank the Department of Student Engagement and Leadership for providing these facilities. We also need to thank ASU Catering for helping us put together the reception that you'll find after the event itself, and a special thank you to Stickboy for donating many of the goodies that you'll see. We also want to thank the good people at App TV who have those expensive looking cameras and equipment back there. They're doing incredible work and they have awesome programming. So they're recording Panorama for App TV, but also make sure you check out the other things they're doing as well. I want to thank the good people at the Free Speech Week. Their inaugural event is this year. We are the featured event for tonight, but they have interesting things happening all week long, so make sure you check that out. You can get a full list of their events at diversity.appstate.edu/saywhat. And a huge thank you to Professor Ann Ward, Kelly Palmer, and Brielle Carnacchio. I'm probably saying that wrong, so if you know Brielle, please apologize for me. For helping us promote this event. They've done incredible work promoting and letting everybody know what we're doing here tonight. And finally, this would not be possible without the Department of Communication, their help, their resources. That's a department that cares so much about providing these sorts of events and these sorts of spaces for students to challenge themselves and push themselves. And I can't thank them enough for doing that. A special thank you within that department to Professor Jean DeHart, the chair of the department, who's really been dedicated to helping us and making sure we can put this together. Now, really finally, I have two groups that I want to personally thank. December 2015, I got a phone call telling me that I was being offered a job here at App State University. And I knew on that day that I was really lucky, but I had no idea exactly how lucky I was. Working with these students, the students who are organizing this event, and the students who are actually participating tonight has been one of the most rewarding professional experiences of my life. It has been so much fun. And so I need to first thank the AppSpeaks student group for all the work that they do, the hours and hours they put in, well into the late evenings and the early mornings. And specifically within that group, I need to thank Sarah Mylan, Jake Reeve, and Carson McGee, who had this event more or less laid out before I even pulled into Boone with my moving truck. And secondly, I need to thank the students who are actually participating tonight. Watching their projects develop from pitches and small ideas to what you're going to see this evening has been so much fun. We had many late nights, many early mornings, many reviews, critiques, and through it all, I'm not sure they always liked me, but I know that I had a great time working with them over the last 9 months. So please enjoy the fruits of their labor. Enjoy the presentations tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Jake to host the rest of the evening. Please join us at the reception afterwards. Tell the speakers what a wonderful job they've done, and enjoy the show. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. We wouldn't be able to have this and make it worth it if y'all didn't come, so thank you guys. Our first speaker is a senior health promotion major. Thank you. Please welcome Morgan Ledford. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? All right. So we have 2 scenarios. In one, we have going to the movies, holidays, comfort, boredom, breakups, and birthday parties. And the second, we have heart disease, diabetes, tooth decay, and high blood pressure. What do both of these have in common? Sugar. Sugar affects us. It's all around us. It's in 80% of the 600,000 products that are in grocery stores. We connect to sugar, and we connect to one another through sugar. And sugar connects us with a little bit of nostalgia. And I'd say most of us remember one of these products on the screen. Like, how excited are you about that Wonder Ball right now? Me too, right? And so the fact that we get really excited over candy that we used to eat when we were little, that speaks volumes to our sugar culture. So how did it become such an integral part of our society today? In 1941, the recommended dietary allowances were formed, and it took the current 12 food groups down to the basic 7. And this was really created to make sure that Americans were eating enough in a time of rationing during World War II. And so as you can see in each section of the food wheel, it displays each different food group, your fruits, your vegetables, your meats, and they wanted to make sure that people who were at home were eating the fresh, perishable food that could not be sent over to soldiers. So the food manufacturing that we have today was born out of this, to create foods to send overseas to soldiers so that it wouldn't get bad by the time they got there. But when the war was over, the food manufacturers wanted to stay in business. So they started marketing to the women in the home. And this is really where we get into our food manufacturing that we still have today. So one thing I do want to point out about this diagram is what it says at the bottom. In addition to the basic 7, eat any other foods you want. So that's fine. What's the point in this, right? So in 1960, they replaced this with the basic 4. And really, this was too vague for a country. Coming out of World War II, we're booming with wealth. And all we have is milk, meat, vegetables, and bread. And so really, Americans were eating more than this. And at the bottom here, it says, plus other foods are needed. So again, the government's like, we kind of want to help you out, but we're going to be pretty vague about it. And so the basic 4 really gave us just that. Only 4 food groups to go off of, and one of them's meat. So of course we're going to consume a lot of it because we don't have that many options. So researchers wanted to see, what does all of this meat consumption have to do with our cholesterol? How does it affect us? So they set out and did some research on it, and it was actually found out last year that this research that they did was funded by the sugar industry. And they wanted to make sure that, hey, don't you talk about sugar. We want you to make sure you tell Americans how bad all that fat is for them. So their studies found what we know today, that a diet high in animal fat increases the risk of heart disease, strokes, and heart attacks. And so now this entered the country into a fat scare. Americans turned their attention to anything and everything that said low fat or fat-free on it. And the food industry really had to make sure that their products still appealed to the fat-conscious consumer. So while everybody's out on the rampage for anything fat-free, the grocery store shelves are being filled with products that say just that. These are some products that you can still find on the shelf today. Fat-free is plastered on the front of them, drawing in the consumer. And one of the easiest things for us to think about being fat-free is salad dressing. So you may think of a time when you went to the grocery store or a salad bar and you chose the fat-free option of salad dressing over others. Do you know why you did that? The knowledge that we have of fat-free influences our decisions because what we do or don't know about fat-free or why we chose that comes from the 1960s and why everybody was so scared of fat. So when you turn the product around, however, and you look at the nutrition label, you can see the amount of sugar. So while this yogurt is fat-free, it has 20 grams of added sugar in just a half of a cup. That's a lot. And one of the easiest things to think about in our diet is soda. Or if we think about this yogurt, for example, that 20 grams may not mean much to you, especially on our nutrition labels. It doesn't have a percentage next to it. It doesn't tell you that that is 83% of your daily limit, especially if you're a woman. So if you're a woman, you should only eat 24 grams of sugar. So you just woke your body up to 20 grams. That's a lot. And so say you go on to lunch and you have a can of soda with your lunch. That 1 can of soda has 35 grams of sugar or 10 teaspoons in it. So if you had that can of Coke with your lunch and then you had that half a cup of yogurt for breakfast, you've already had 250% of your daily limit of your sugar for that day. So it's easy to see how we can go through our day We can have 5 cans of soda. We can have yogurt and our dessert too. And we're not even going to get into what percentage that would be. So in 1992, the food guide pyramid was created. And this was really transformative when compared to, say, the basic 7 or the basic 4, because it showed moderation, it showed proportion, and it showed how much of each food group should be shown in your diet. But the problem here is that the evidence that the government used to form this was really shaky, and they didn't have a lot of evidence. And also, it says you should have servings of each group. That's going to look different for everyone. What does that mean for you, and what does that mean for you? So, at the time that this food guide pyramid comes out to Americans, so does supersized food, and so does the popularity of eating out. For example, the size of bagels grew. If you walked into a bakery today and they handed you a 3-inch diameter bagel, you might be kind of mad, wondering, where's my bagel? This is mini, right? So supersize became our normal. Americans went from maybe having a 3-inch diameter bagel to the bigger one, and so their serving of grain a day increased, and they didn't really even think about it. Another example would be the Big Gulp. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the legendary drink from the 7-Eleven convenience stores, and maybe this will spark your memory. So really, our portions increased, and what we expected when we went into the 7-Eleven convenience store or the bakery or anywhere for that matter, we expected more. We expected more for our money. And so the idea that bigger is better really caught on to Americans. And so as we increased portions, we increased our processed carb consumption, our simple carb consumption, like bread, pasta, cereal, rice, all that good stuff. So this created yet another problem. As you eat more simple carbs in your diet, this is all processed the same in the body. So as you do this more and more, your risk for obesity increases because it's just turned to fat tissue in your body. And this is really a problem because our servings increase, and breakfast went from being bacon, eggs, and fruit to toaster strudels, yoo-hoos, and muffins. Sugar, sugar, sugar. So let's look at the 1992 food pyramid again. The bottom here says bread, cereal, rice, and pasta group, or the carbs group. That says you should have 6 to 11 servings. That's excessive. So maybe we can see now why the bigger bagel was and still is a problem. In 2005, my pyramid was created. And it was really just a simplified form of my food guide pyramid, pretty much the same. They introduced some physical activity into the illustration. But if you're like me and you've seen this before, I never got that till I did research for this, so I guess it didn't affect me too much. So we can see why this probably didn't affect many Americans. Yeah, it's colorful. Yeah, there's a really weird-looking guy on there, but what else does that say about our diet? Not much. So in 2011, my plate was created, and it's what we currently use today. The idea behind this, or the government's idea behind this, was to show what our plate should look like, what we should be eating at every meal. But realistically, this doesn't happen. People don't have access to these food groups at every single meal. I mean, as college students, whether you're on or off campus, does this make sense to you? It doesn't for me, at least not all the time. And so it probably doesn't for most Americans in their day-to-day life. And due to the fact that this is what we currently use, we don't really know the implications of it yet. We don't, like the other ones, we don't know if this is helping or solving anything. But due to how unrealistic it is, we can probably guess that it's not solving any of our problems. So throughout the history of these illustrations, we, and I say we to mean Americans, we oriented ourselves differently in these posters that were maybe in our school cafeteria or what was offered in the grocery store. And we looked at the way, we maybe not even questioned what was offered to us. So the government had good intentions behind all of these, but they ultimately created problems instead of solutions. While they meant to address heart disease, they ultimately increased the rates of obesity and diabetes in our country. midlines and diseases have grown, and so has America's identity too, and addiction in sugar. You can be a vegetarian, you can be a non-smoker, or you cannot drink alcohol. But it's pretty uncomfortable to be a non-sugar eater in our society today. I mean, the American diet is impossible to talk about without mentioning sugar, and other countries agree. This is the American food section in the UK. Pretty laughable, right? Every single one of those products has added sugar in them. And while to you that may not look like what you eat every day, there's some truth behind that. And by adding sugar to everything in our diet, it's just become homogenized across the board. And of course, this is not the only thing that's changed in America. Of course, we have overscheduled lives. We have office jobs. We have decreased physical activity. We eat out more than we should, and we watch a little too much TV. But it's not all individual. Factors started playing into our culture, our sugar culture, before anybody in this room was born. And they're going to continue to work against us. The obesity issue in America is a social justice issue. And you're probably tired of hearing me say the word sugar. You're like, please stop saying it. But when I talk about the sugar culture in America, I'm talking about the health of our country and the problems that lie therein. Research shows that children who become obese in childhood are likely to become impoverished adults. That's an issue. Parents should be able to help children discern from what's healthy and what isn't. But not all parents possess this knowledge. Something has to be done about the health of our country. And that change has to come from all levels of society. Encourage others to make decisions instead of putting them down when they don't know what else to do or how else to eat. Stay aware and don't be easily persuaded by everything that's advertised to you or put in front of you. These changes can be made. We created our culture and we can change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Our next speaker is a senior public relations major. Please welcome Keenan Dudley.
Hello. Hey, my name's Keenan. Tonight I'm going to be talking to you guys about improv comedy. Improv comedy is the only constant in my life, and that's pretty ironic because improv is always changing. Thank you. I discovered improv in high school. My sophomore year of high school, I tried out for our team. It was called Random Acts, and I fell in love with it on day one. And when I got up here to App State, I continued on that path, and I became a part of Noun. Through those experiences, I found out that I loved improv, and I was having a lot of fun doing it. But I didn't really take it too seriously. And so last summer, I decided to go to Chicago and spend the summer immersing myself in improv comedy. While I was there, I didn't know anybody in the city, so all of my interactions with people and with myself revolved around improv. I was spending time working at the Playground Theater and taking classes at the Second City and Improv Olympic, which are three prominent theaters inside the city that have featured most of the famous comedians of the 20th century. These are a few handful of my personal favorites who have come out of those organizations. But the point being, I was learning from the best people I could surround myself with, and while I was there, I discovered very interesting things about what improv has done for me personally, socially, and professionally. And when I came back from that trip, I really wanted to continue exploring those concepts, and tonight I wanted to share that with you. So the first totem pole of the improv wonder to me is how improv has affected me personally. This is a picture of a lion. My first professor at Second City was a man named Tim Sosko, and on the first day of class he talked to me, and it was a fantastic metaphor about the change in mindset that I had experienced through improv. What he said was, as a survival method, we're taught, if we see a lion in the jungle, we're taught to either fight it or run away. There's one answer, there's a right answer, and we've got to make it immediately. But at improv, Tim told us that we're supposed to look at the lion and look at his mane, look and figure out where that lion is looking at, what he's thinking, check out the grass, feel the sun around us. Basically, we're supposed to sit there until we get eaten by a lion. But the point of the metaphor is, improv is about opening up your mind in a way that you're never really taught. So back to personally, there is no right answer in an improv scene. You can't get up there thinking that you know what you're going to say, because you can't possibly. All the scenes are based around a one-word suggestion that you get from the audience, and that pigeonholes itself down into a bunch of different scenarios, but you can't have a preconceived preparation of what those scenarios are going to be. So you can't get it right all the time, and that's okay. Because you can't get it right all the time, there's no need to second guess yourself. You just have to go out there and say the first thing that comes to your mind. And that thing becomes right because you said it. You said it, and it is law. It is now reality no matter what you say. If I walked out there and I said, I am 7 years old and I don't have any legs. Like that is the case. That is the scenario for those next 5 minutes. And even though that's ridiculous and you wouldn't want to do that at the start of an improv scene, there's no time to think, oh crap, I just said I don't have any legs, I'm clearly standing up here. You just have to go. So what that brings me to is the third personal concept of improv. There's nothing to fear. There's nothing to fear. The only thing that can possibly screw you up in an improv scene is fear. And that fear manifests itself in you constantly thinking about what you've done and thinking about what you need to do and what you need to change to make the show go well. But there's nothing you can do. You're on a train and it's moving and you just have to ride along with it. And let me tell you, that is a really relaxing state of mind to be. I love experiencing this outside of improv. It's really taught me just not to take myself so seriously. We're constantly told how to act and the right way to turn in a resume, the right way to write a cover letter. We're constantly told the right way to do everything, and I've slowly begun to realize there is no right way to do anything. Nobody knows what we're doing, and that's okay. So that brings me to the next concept that improv has really helped me out with, and that's my social skills, we'll call it. I was a kind of awkward and quiet guy in high school. I feel like we all were. We all know the story. And we all found something to pull us out of that shell. And for me, it was improv. And one of the first things that really helped me pull out of my awkward social shell is the concept of eye contact. This is me in Chapel Hill wearing the same t-shirt I am today because I own one shirt. Staring deeply into the eyes of another member of Noun as we were performing. This eye contact is the first thing that you're taught to walk out to in an improv scene. You're kind of told to silently walk up there and look somebody in the eyes. And what that does is gives you an immediate connection. It gets you on the same page, and it shows respect. Inside and outside of the improv world, eye contact is one of the easiest and most sincere forms of respect you can give to somebody, because it shows that you're truly listening to them and you really care what they have to say. And it's such a simple concept that when you're looking at somebody in the eyes, it's much harder to be thinking about something else. Now I know that we can be pretty good at it. We can stare at our professor and also be thinking about what we're going to eat for lunch. But there is intrinsical value in making eye contact as soon as you meet somebody and shake their hands that can't be ignored and can't be forgotten. And that same value manifests itself in a good improv scene. The next social lesson that I learned from improv was that how and why is more important than who and what. And this sounds kind of cliche, it sounds kind of silly, but all that really means is that behind every single person's besides every single person's point of view or way of life, there's a reason why they think that, and there's a reason why they came to that conclusion. And that's always in an improv scene more interesting than finding out about a person. For example, if you got Tim and Mike, two 40-year-old guys who are working on a car up on an improv scene, it's a pretty boring scene if you just sit there and talk about what you're doing on the car. But if you explore the lives of Tim and Mike and learn how they came to get there and why they love working on cars so much, it can take you down some fantastic places and into the heads of people you've never met before. And I like to take this outside of the improv world, specifically when I'm talking to somebody who I don't agree with politically, because it can be very frustrating to talk to somebody you disagree with on those standards, because it kind of feels like life or death. But if you talk for them long enough and you start to understand the reasons behind their decisions, it's mainly fear or it's mainly something self-contrived, but the point is, it's never really terrible. Like, there are terrible people who think terrible things, but they don't go out trying to be terrible. They have justifications in their head, and it's more interesting to learn those to me than to learn why this person hates raisins. Finally, someone else's idea is a gift in an improv scene. If you walk out and you don't know what you're going to say, and your partner comes up to you and says, "Hey Steve, nice haircut. I love afros." You know that you're Steve, you've got a haircut, it's an afro, and you just cut your hair, so you're making a really big change, and that immediately opens up the door for so many possibilities in your scene. Now that you know that you're Steve with an afro, you start to think about every single possibility of that person's life and why that person would want to get an afro. So in real life, what this means is that it's okay to take the back seat, and it's really exciting to let somebody else just talk to you, and for you to just sit there and look them in the eyes and say yeah, and just repeat the word yeah, and listen to somebody and talk to them for long enough, and they'll tell you about yourselves, and they'll be just as engaged in the conversation as you are. So this is a good social tip, and it's also a good professional tip, which is the last totem of the improv poll, professional. Yes, and Tina Fey talks about this. She made it famous in her book, Bossy Pants. Yes, and is the concept that you agree with anything anybody else says and you add on to it. In an improv scene, this is the basic pillar. This is what you're taught on day one, is that to make this scene run, you have to agree with what the person says, establish that as a reality, and build onto it. In the professional world, it works the same way. If anybody comes up to you with a project, you're willing to work on it, you're excited to be there, and you have your own input into the project. And the crazy thing is, as we learned about personally, it doesn't matter what that input is. Just the fact that you have input and you're willing to talk and create more ideas can take you guys somewhere. You don't have to have the right answer as long as you have an answer. Somebody has got to take control of an improv scene and of any sort of project or professional development idea that you're working on. What this means is that if your partner walks out there and doesn't give you a gift, it's okay for you to give them a gift, even if they have an idea in their heads, because they're going to take your idea and run with it and put their ideas together. And it's really exciting to realize that if nobody is saying anything, it's okay for you to step up to the plate and talk. I had issues with it a lot, especially when I was working on projects where I saw the people who I was working with as higher status than myself. I was afraid to input my own ideas because I felt like they weren't warranted and nobody would want them. But there are many times where we got stuck, and I could have gotten out of that meeting a lot faster if I had just spoken up and said my idea. Any project has limitless possibilities. What this means is that it's kind of wrapping up of everything I've been trying to explain about improv and about my personal life. Things are not going to go the way you want them to go, and that's okay. And just the fact that you're sitting down and you're starting something and you're working on something is good enough. Basically, what I want you guys to get drilled in your head, if you take one thing away from this, it's acceptance. I want you guys to understand that personally, you're not going to know what you're doing all the time, and that's perfectly fine. You're going to have fun either way. You're going to laugh about it, and you're going to move on. The only way a failure becomes a failure to you is if you sit there and ruminate on it and don't move on. And that's impossible to do in an improv scene, and it's impossible to do in a real life. As long as you accept yourself, the people around you, and the ideas being presented, you're going to go far. Thank you.
Thank you, Keenan. Our next speaker is also a senior public relations major. Please welcome Jenna Huff.
On October 30th, 2010, I was preparing my mind and body for a regional cross-country meet. I was standing with my team and my coach, and we were joking around and thinking to ourselves, why did my coach decide to bring hot water on this cold day? Who wants to drink hot water before they run a 5K? And so we get to the starting line, and we're thinking to ourselves, why did we join a sport that we're running 3.1 miles just to finish? As the horn blows, I decide to get a good placement because if I knew if I get to a good spot, I would make it to a state competition meet. So I run with a girl that I've been running with this entire season with. She's in front of me, and I knew if I stuck with her, my time would be better. So I'm running with her majority of the race, and I lose her about half a mile from the finish line. And my mom always stood 500 meters from the finish line just so I can get that sprint at the end and let everything I have in my body out. And I knew right when I saw her, she just screams, "Go, Jenna, go!" And I'm thinking to myself, I can't do anymore. So I began to sprint. And I recognized that ponytail that I've been following the entire time. She stopped 10 yards from the finish line. And I'm thinking to myself, she just ran 3.1 miles and she's not going to finish. Instead of passing her, I grabbed her arm and I assisted her across the finish line. And I remember once we crossed the finish line, I put her in front of me, and the official looked at me and he said, "You can't do that." And I remember I'm all out of breath, and I'm leaning over, and I said, "I just did." And I went to go stand at the corner, waiting on my mom and my teammates to finish. And people started coming up to me. "Why did you do that? Why did you help her?" And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know. Why wouldn't you? I'm really bad at this. So a lot of times what people don't understand about sportsmanship is they have a wrong perception of what it actually is. So a lot of times when we think about it, we're playing defense and a person is going beside us and you say, "Excuse me." That's not what it is. So I want you to understand it's how you treat others with respect. It's what you're doing to achieve the sportsmanship. So a lot of times people have the perception that you only can perceive sportsmanship is if you lose. You're a great loser. You can just walk off and say, "Well, I played a good game." It's also the fact that if you win or lose, you're the same type of athlete. I was always told by my coach, no matter the winning or lose situation, I want you all to walk off that court or athletic setting the same exact way. And knowing that inside of you, no matter what happened, you were proud of your abilities. Now, with that one moment, when I helped Deb Guthman across the finish line, I ended up winning 2 state awards, a Durham Club Sport Award, and then was flown out to Colorado Springs, Colorado, to receive the Olympic Committee Jack Kelly Fair Play Award. This has only been given to Olympians. A girl from Stanley County with a population of 30,000 was given this award. Who would have thought? I think about my athletic career as a 5-sport athlete, and I had multiple times where I might have shot the winning game in a soccer game, or I had the winning shot in a basketball game. But the only thing that I keep talking about, that I keep remembering about, is this one sportsmanship act. And it's the one thing I'm proud about. 6 years later, I'm still talking about it today. And when I think about why did I win these honors? Why was I the only one that year that kept winning the North Carolina High School Athletic Association Awards? Why wasn't anybody else going up for it? Why isn't the norm for other people to help each other when they're down? Why is it that we need to cut each other down to get to the top instead of helping one another to get to the top? Oops. So I have a question for everyone. So how many of you played school athletics in elementary school? Keep your hands raised. Okay, good amount. How many of you played sports in middle school? Okay. How many of you played sports in high school? How many of you played sports on a collegiate team now? Okay. Good job. A lot of times, the number of people, when you think about it, they were just recruited from high school to college. You think that's the only reason why the numbers drop. Well, as you can see, 40 million kids go out for school, go out for athletics. So you think about those awesome soccer games that you remember your mom brought all those orange slices and the Capri Suns, and it was the best time ever. And then you got to middle school, and it's a little bit more serious, and the numbers are dropping. And then you got to high school because you had to compete for it. You had to go for that position. But the number one reason why kids join is because it's fun. It's fun to be with your friends. It's fun to do the sport that you love. But the number one reason why kids drop out of athletics altogether is because they hate being criticized. They hate being yelled at. So when you're the parent in the car and your child's in the back and they just had a terrible soccer game, don't fuss at them. Tell them, I love to watch you play. Because whenever you think about it, whenever you talk more about them and what you think that they're doing to make them better, you're actually making them bitter. I'm really bad. Sorry, I had to do that. So a lot of times of what we need is mentors do matter. So it can be your coach, it can be your parents, it can be your family members, it can be your school teacher. They're the ones that are making you who you are today. And I'd like to thank my siblings and my parents for making me who I am. They're the reason why I helped that girl. They're the reason why I stopped. Because yes, winning is very important to me. I loved winning. But at the same time, did I actually win if she just had a bad stroke of luck and stopped? Only 10 yards from the finish line. And so a lot of times with society, the only way to success is if you win. There's no participation award. That's another argument in itself. But I think a lot of times what we need to understand is it's a team setting. So if it's for a job, if it's for school, or if it's athletics, you are working with somebody. Somebody is contributing to something. Not everybody can be MVP, but someone can contribute a talent that they all share. So what I mean to strive to win and not to make the other team lose, you can win. Ultimately, that's the purpose of any type of job or any athletic setting. You want to win, but you don't want to knock someone down just to get on top. So I know, as a big Duke fan, I can respect at the same time UNC. And so the big thing that I want to point out is when it comes to Duke and Carolina, the only thing that's different between these two teams is the uniform they place on their body and the coach that is coaching them. But if you take all the attributes away from them, they're the same exact person. They love the sport that they play. They love the game. They love doing what they're doing. And I think we can learn a lot about Duke and Carolina. It's because whenever we see it on, if Duke's playing and a UNC fan's in the room with me, they're like, I'm cheering for the other guy. And so I'm thinking, I do the same thing. Whenever UNC's playing, I always cheer for the next person. And I don't know why. I don't know why people do that, because it's just a team. And I think that we can use this in everyday life. We put each other in boxes. So what I mean by that is if someone is completely different than you are and you don't understand them, it's easy just to put them in a box, put a nice little bow on it, and put it to the side, because it's easier to understand them that way. And even with political campaigns going on last year, Republicans and Democrats have a team color. Republicans are red and Democrats are blue. And if you're purple, whoa, that's weird. Because you're not supposed to understand both sides. But I think that's what we're messing up on. Because if we were able to contribute our ideas together and have sportsmanship with one another, we could do great things. Good game was also a best thing that I've learned through athletics. Why did the coach make us slap the other team's hand even when we lost? But that's something that we need to learn. You're not going to get every job. You're not going to be on the top of every situation. But you are going to have a good job doing it. And so what you need to do is if somebody around you is doing a good thing or they're actually doing something right, recognize them. Sometimes they don't know if they're actually doing it is right. Tell them good job. Be proud of them, because you might be the only person that's saying that to them. Sportsmanship has been something near and dear to me. And as I tell my kids that whenever I go to my mom's daycare or I talk to an elementary school, treat others the way you want to be treated. And they scream out, "That's the golden rule." It seems to me that we sort of forget once we get older. Keep that in mind whenever you're living in everyday life. You don't have to use sportsmanship in just athletics, but you can use it in any other type of setting. Thank you.
Jenna. Our next speaker is a transfer student from New York, majoring in French. Please welcome Laura Riley.
So I was working at this local restaurant as a waitress, and I come across some unfair situations in the restaurant business. I don't know if any of you know what that's like. But most of the time, you just put your head down and you keep working, and you get paid and you leave. It's your job. You gotta keep your job, right? So there was a situation, however, where we were working a catering event at the end of the week, and it was mandatory. Normally, the catering events were done outside of the restaurant, but this one was gonna be on site, and we had to work it. And we were not told how we were getting paid. Nobody knew how we were getting paid. And I knew this was one thing I was gonna fight. I was like, I'm an employee. I deserve to know how much I'm gonna be compensated for my work. So I went up to my boss the night before the event, and now, although I'm all confident with my rights, it was a delicate subject. You know, it's about pay, and I'm approaching my boss. He's not only my boss, he's the owner of the restaurant. So I'm a little nervous. So I figure, how can I approach this like in a neutral way? So I figured, let me just ask a question, right? That seems neutral. So I go up to him and I ask, I'm like, hey, so what's exactly going on tomorrow? And he whips his head around and he says, what's going on tomorrow? It's a catering event, and all you kids want to know is how you're getting paid, and sometimes work is just work. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. So in that moment, I totally forgot my point of that conversation, and I looked at him. This is the kicker. I looked at him and I reassured him that I was not just some kid asking him how much I was going to get paid. So this experience, along with a few others, has brought me back time and time again to the idea of language and power. And so tonight I want to talk about linguistics and autonomy. Linguistics is simply the study of language and its structures. Autonomy is simply self-governing. Auto meaning self, nomi meaning laws, so self-governing, or like your personal power. It can be applied in a few different contexts. But so a lot of times how autonomy is tied into language is through manipulation. And there's this Russian researcher, Dr. Aisa Akapova. She did this really wonderful work. And one of the things I read that she had written was, language offers a whole arsenal of means to realize manipulative aims. I really think that word arsenal is important. One of the things to keep in mind about manipulation is that it never trespasses the frontiers of our traditional linguistic structures or everyday language, right? So it gives us a variety of tools, a variety of weapons in a conversation to use manipulation. My intention is not to give you your own arsenal, but to help you protect your own autonomy. In my conversation with my boss, I gave away my autonomy. I gave my power away. He didn't just take it. So I hope that some of this information can help protect people's autonomy. Okay, so what I want to be when I grow up, an applied linguist, they came up with this thing called critical discourse analysis, and that is to uncover, it was made to uncover the opacities in language which maintain that unequal relation of power. So I think in this one, I particularly like the word opacity. So that means you simply can't see through it. So basically what we're looking at is that unseen arsenal in language, in everyday conversation. Okay, before we look through the linguistic lens, I just want to look at a few of the basics of manipulation. And one of those is the distortion of reality. We do this every day. We minimize, we maximize, we euphemize. One of the ones that my boyfriend hears every day is, I'm starving. I'm not starving. The other one that we use is when we euphemize things. So This one kind of cuts close to home. One of the things that we do in social circles, right? So we have person A, right? And they say an insult to person B. Person B says, gets a little bristly about it, shows a little bit of, maybe they're a little upset, and person A says, hey, I'm just joking, right? This is euphemization. We have made something that's an insult into a joke, right? We've made it smaller, we've made it less significant, and in fact, we've manipulated somebody's behavior. Many times that person B, will be like, well, you know, for me, for example, I don't want to be the person who can't take a joke. You know what I mean? Of course, you know, oh, you're just joking. Oh, that's fine. But we gain our power when we stand up for ourselves, even if it is just a joke. The next two kind of go together. Oh, okay. Okay, so the narrowing of the perception or the information field and the widening of the illusion or the opportunity for illusion. So you come into my restaurant, you want a martini, I'm going to offer you Kettle One or Grey Goose, and I'm not going to talk about the aristocrat that's behind the bar, right? 90% of the time, you're going to pick one of those two. I've narrowed your perception, I've narrowed your information field so that I can dictate some of your behavior. You're going to pick one of those things. Not only that, I've probably widened the illusion that I'm actually taking care of you when I'm really taking care of myself. Okay, so pragmatics. Pragmatics is the part of linguistics that deals with the vehicle of communication, how we say what we're saying. So as opposed to like semantics. Semantics is more about meaning and what we're saying, and pragmatics is more about like how we say it. So for example, questions. Questions are a form of pragmatics. Questions are so powerful. I feel like I could do a whole presentation on questions, but it's my nerd. Okay. So are questions just a simple request for information? Okay. I'll give you a hint. The question was, the point of that question was not to elicit an answer from you guys. Thankfully, nobody actually gave me one. But the point of that question was to demonstrate the power of a question. There's a little bit of pressure. I'm sure, like, you probably felt a little bit of pressure. Like, is anybody going to answer this actual question? Is this rhetorical? But there's a lot of power in questions. I was at a party a little while back, and this guy was really proud of his Canadian club, and he wanted everybody to try it. And so he asked me if I had wanted some, and I don't drink, and so I respectfully declined. And I didn't, that was ensued by some continual questioning. He was a little tipsy, and he continued to ask me if I wanted some of this whiskey, and I said no, thank you. But in that time that he had questioned me, I got progressively more uncomfortable. Normally, I don't feel the need to explain why I don't drink. Normally, I don't feel apologetic. I don't have a problem with this, but when he kept asking and asking, I got uncomfortable. It even affected me on like a physiological level. You know, like my cheeks got red, probably like they are right now. You know, I was uncomfortable. That fight or flight came up. I was like, do I want to slap him or do I want to walk out the door? You know, like I'm not sure where I'm at right now. So yeah, so that's just some of that is how the power of questions, that's just to show the power of questions. All right, so the next piece of pragmatics that we're going to look at is presuppositions. Presuppositions are interesting. Presuppositions are assumed truths, right? So in this statement, I'm glad you're not so argumentative anymore. There are 3 assumed truths in this statement. The first one is that you were, in fact, argumentative. The second is that you are no longer argumentative. And the third is that argumentativeness is a bad thing. You know, that we've made a judgment. All in that one statement, we've got 3 assumed truths. Now, if you were never argumentative at all, that's a false presupposition. I mean, these are, that's when you get into trouble with false presuppositions. So that brings me to the next one, loaded questions. I'm sure you guys have heard this phrase. I'm not sure if you all know exactly what it is, but it's a false presupposition embedded in a question. And what this does is it leads you into an impossible situation to answer. Loaded questions are really effective means of manipulation. So they're used often in a court of law, right? If I'm to ask, have you stopped stealing, Mr. Babbitts, right? If Mr. Babbitts says, yes, I've stopped stealing. Well, if he says yes, it means he was stealing at one time. If he says no, it means he's still stealing. The man can't get out of this. It's like, he's doomed no matter what. And this is true in the court of law today. Like, we come into this, in this country, we believe that we are innocent until proven guilty, but this is one of the most used things in interrogations and, like I said, in the court of law. And there's actually a whole field, it's legal linguistics, and they go into this. It's really interesting. Okay, voice. Voice is another part of pragmatics. Voice, not to be confused with tone. Voice is simply the relationship between a subject and an object in a sentence. I'm going to take it one step further and look at the agent as well. Stick with me. So the subject in this situation is the man. I know this is a little bit of a harsh example, but I think it's really relevant and important. So the man is the subject who raped the girl, who's the object. The man is underlined, that's the agent as well. He does the action. The girl was raped by the man. Now we've switched the position of the object and the subject. So the girl becomes the subject, excuse me. The girl becomes the subject. The man is the object. In the last one, we have agentless passive. So now we've completely taken out the agent, and we're left with the girl was raped. So we have no object, we have a subject, and no agent. So the girl was raped. And you might be thinking, like, why is this relevant? What does this have to do with anything in my life? Well, studies show that they took surveys, they did a bunch of surveys, and they showed that when we use the agentless passive voice, males and females were more likely to be more accepting of sexual assault and rape. Okay, so how can we protect ourselves? If it feels like a trap, it probably is a trap. You know that feeling that you get in a conversation where you're kind of uncomfortable and you feel like something's not quite right in this conversation? There's probably something going on with that. Take your time. A lot of times when, for example, if somebody asks you a question, do you really need to answer right in that moment? Can you take your time when you answer that question? Get clarity. We want to know, is this person, are they saying the truth? Kind of like those false presuppositions. Is everything in this situation correct? Are they operating from a different stance and perception than we are? And harness the power of questions. Ask yourself, what's the intent of this person? The only difference between somebody's speech when they're being manipulative is their intention. Because like I said, manipulation never leaves the linguistic practices that we use every day. So harness the power of questions. Ask yourself, what's their intention? Are there any presuppositions? Are they putting me in a bad position? What's the expectations here? You know, whatever questions you can use to get more clarity on the situation. So if you think back to my original example, so what was presupposed with my boss is that I was just some kid. I'm 30, by the way. I was just some kid asking for money like I don't know how to work. But the truth is I'm a good damn worker, and I deserve to know how much I'm going to get paid. So thank you. No, that's yours.
Thank you, Laura. So next up we have Indigo Hollister. She is a first-year sophomore from Mars Hill, and she is a communication sciences and disorders major. Please welcome Laura.
Okay, so I want all of you to close your eyes just for a second and think about what you ate today. Yeah, that's how I feel. Now, think about how much of what you ate or what you got on your plate was finished, or how much was left over. Okay, you can open your eyes now. So chances are, for at least one of your meals throughout the day, you threw away food that was edible. All of this contributes to the enormous amount of food that is wasted, not only in America, but the Western world as a whole. Per a recent report by the United Nations Environmental Program and the World Resources Institute, every year, about 1/3 of all food produced worldwide is wasted. This equals out to a loss of over $1 trillion. That's a lot of money. It's hard to comprehend a sum of money that large, so I decided to put it in perspective for you guys. Here is a $100 bill. Many of us know what it looks like. Few of us have actually had one. So here are 100 $100 bills, which is equal to $10,000. This packet is tiny, less than 1/2 inch thick, yet it contains so many possibilities. Moving on, we see what looks like a small pile of money. Can anyone guess how much this is? Believe it or not, it is $1 million, or 100 of those packets. I mean, y'all, I could easily fit that in my backpack. So now we see $100 million stacked perfectly on a pallet. And now, $1 billion. Wow, that seems impressive. But if that seems like a lot, let's move on to the whole point of this. 1,000,000 million, 1,000 billion, a 1 followed by 12 zeros. $1 trillion. I want you all to notice that these pallets are double stacked. That's a lot of money. All of this is wasted because of our consumption habits and our lack of knowledge about this topic. Every year, industrialized countries waste almost as much food as the entire net food production of sub-Saharan Africa. Every year, in America alone, 30 to 40% of the food supply is wasted. This equals out to over 70 billion pounds of food, and further, it equals out to over 20 pounds of food being wasted by each person every single month. Yet, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization still estimates that about 795 million people in our world are suffering from chronic undernourishment. This means that 1 in 9 people in our world are going severely hungry, and even more who are on or under the poverty line, not knowing if they're going to get their next meal or not. This problem is largely ignored, not to mention our culture is somewhat a culture of more, so the severity is largely overlooked. Now, I understand that this might not be new info for some or maybe all of you. It's no secret that we waste a lot of food, and it's no secret that people die every day from lack of food. We all care about this problem, but we don't necessarily value it as a culture. It's not just about food waste or feeding those less fortunate. It's about our culture and our values as a whole. If you want to see what a culture cares about, look at their waste habits, their consumption habits, their choices in general. In our culture, we value this idea of convenience. We find ourselves aggravated when our packages are late in the mail, or when the drive-thru at McDonald's is taking too long. We value having so many different choices when there are people all over the world who have none. I find myself thinking about this every day when I decide what pair of shoes to put on. In our culture, it's considered weird not to have more than one choice, or not to want the latest gadget or iPhone. If you've ever traveled to an underdeveloped country, you know that feeling of privilege. In our eyes, they have so little, yet they're so happy. When we come back here, we have so much, yet it's never good enough. Collectively, how and what we consume reflects our priorities. But how does this reflect our morality? We are so dependent on these small, petty things that we forget that most of the world doesn't have these choices or these opportunities. And it's not to blame on one person, it's our culture as a whole. If we don't practice something daily, we forget about it. Yes, it's still there in the back of our minds. And yes, we still care, because what moral human doesn't care about starving children? But our practice simply isn't there. Our food waste is just one demonstration of our consumption habits. And because this is an urgent problem, it's one that we need to understand. You hear politicians talk about population growth, and the fact that by 2050, we will need to feed over 9 billion people. Yet there's never a mention of a solution or a plan to deal with this growing issue that will largely impact generations to come. To feed over 9 billion people, we would have to increase global food production by 70 to 100%, which is just not possible for our world to handle. I mean, we already have a hard enough time feeding those in our world already. Agriculture is already estimated to be responsible for 70% of the planet's freshwater withdrawals, 80% of the world's tropical and subtropical deforestation, and 30 to 35% of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. When faced with these facts, we realize that it's simply not possible for our world to handle. And we realize the seriousness of this problem and the consequences that could come if we don't do anything about it. So what can we do about it? I would like to point out that this was not mentioned in any of the 2016 presidential debates. And as I feel like this is a problem that needs to be addressed. Many people don't realize, and I didn't realize this before, we waste enough food to feed 3 billion people. If we as a culture could reduce our food waste, then we could not only reduce the estimated amount of food that we would need to feed the population in the future, but we could also have a positive impact on those who are facing food insecurity today. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. How does this work? How does the food that I throw away affect the economy and the people around me so much? Trust me, I was confused too. I didn't know that my actions could have such an impact, but the reality is that they do. And while the relationship is not direct and it's a little hard to understand, it basically starts with consumers and what they choose to buy. It's no secret that over the past 20 years, Americans have started to eat more. And as a result, portions have gotten bigger. As Morgan said in her presentation, the bagel. Even me, I eat a lot. People call me a bottomless pit. Like, what? This increase in consumption also increases the demand for food, which then results in a rise in food prices. This rise in food prices makes it harder for those with low incomes to afford food, while others are still buying more than they actually eat. Secretary General of the Danish Red Cross does a good job explaining it when he says, "The Western world's overconsumption of food is affecting global food prices. The more we in the West consume and the more we throw out, the higher food prices rise globally." In other undeveloped nations, they need all of the food that is grown and actually makes it through the season for a profit. So there's little left over for them to eat. It gets transported to America and it ends up in a garbage bin. This really doesn't seem fair. Not only does food waste affect hunger and raise the prices of food, but it also takes a toll on our environment. And what's more important than and what's more important than the environment we live in? Our practices and consumption are incredibly far-reached. And when we take a step back, we have to ask ourselves, do we really care about the world that we live in? See, when food is thrown away, it ends up in a landfill. There, without oxygen or sunlight, it rots and becomes a source of methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas and contributes greatly to global warming. This demand for more food also increases the demand for more water, land, and energy used in producing, packaging, and transporting food items. Not to mention advertises and commercials. This is where Arby's comes in, because I swear if I see one more of their commercials, I will break my TV. When we take a step back and look at this issue, we see that it is huge. We all have some of these habits, and we all probably consume and waste more than we should. I mean, it's hard not to. And even though this issue is really important to me, I still find myself wanting that iPhone 7 or grabbing more food than I can eat just because I'm hungry. Recognizing the reality and size of this issue is the first step in beginning the transformation of our world. And although it's not a simple problem, it does start with us. There are so many things we can do in our daily lives that will have a positive impact instead of a negative one. Here in Boone, we have a huge focus on sustainability. Yet, I still see the same consumption habits. But let's be honest, sometimes us college students don't eat just because we're hungry, we eat because we're bored, we eat because we're stressed, or we eat because we're just flat out emotional. I know I do. And then we don't know what to do with what's left than to throw it away. With our campaign, Sustain Appalachian, we could put an emphasis on this issue and educate students and the community about the resources that we have. Many people don't know that we have a food pantry on campus that we can easily donate food to, or that all of our overproduced food goes to the Hunger and Health Coalition, or that we compost our food waste. Our college is taking this positive step, and that's awesome, but there's still so many others who aren't. Understanding this culture can help us understand our individual choices and why we make them. Now, I could go on to tell you all of these things that you should do, like get smaller portions, don't waste food, don't go grocery shopping while you're hungry, because you'll only buy more, or compost your food, or donate it. But I know that these things are easier said than done, and I know that me telling you what to do is not going to make the lasting impact. These things are hard, and they're hard for a reason. This isn't what we're used to, and it's not the normal thing to do in our culture. To me, it's like trying to eat healthy. Do you know how hard it is to eat healthy when that is in front of you? I mean, come on guys, it's chocolate cake. Going in the grocery store, I always tell myself, Indigo, you do not need 3 different bags of chips just because you can't decide which one you're in the mood for. Indigo, do not go buy more food. You have leftovers in your fridge. I know you ate them yesterday, but they'll go to waste. Stop being spoiled. Indigo, you do not need 3 pairs of Converse. They're the same shoe, but different colors. Get a grip. These individual choices do matter because it is a huge problem. We can be told to do something, but the problem isn't going to change until we collectively change. As we start to understand the politics of our individual choices, where we spend our money, how we spend our money, what we consume, and what we waste, then we can understand and try to turn around the way our culture is going. The best advice that I can give you all, and the thing that I really want you to take away from this, is to just be mindful. Be mindful of all your choices and all your consumption habits. Reducing our food waste is just a start to changing the way our culture consumes. If people could understand the reality of what our world would look like if we don't change our habits, then they could understand the seriousness of this problem. A problem that's not going away, and a problem where the solution starts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Indigo. Next up, we have Paola Garcia. She is a sophomore from Mooresville, majoring in public relations. And we'd also just like to let everyone know that this next topic is kind of heavy, concerning suicide and hate crimes. And if you're uncomfortable with these topics, please feel free to leave the room. We will have someone welcome you back in when this is over. So please welcome Paola to the stage.
Thank you. Andrew Athos, a poor, defenseless, elderly man, was brutally beaten to death with a metal object only after his assailant found out he was gay. Gregory Beauchamp, a young 21-year-old male, not much older than me or some of you in this room, murdered. What was he doing at the time of his death? Going to a New Year's Eve party. His assailant shouting anti-gay slurs at him as he pulled the trigger. Daniel Fetty, known simply by his friends as Dano, a gay man from Ohio. As if killing him wasn't enough, his assailants decided to strip his body of all of his clothes and throw it in the dumpster, as if he was actual trash. Lawrence Forbes King, an innocent 14-year-old boy. 14 years old. He literally had his whole life ahead of him. Shot in the head by a fellow classmate who didn't approve of his feminine qualities. Joanna Vega, a 36-year-old woman whose partner's brother chastised her for her sexual orientation. So what did he do? Gunned her down. Samantha Chalet. While in high school, she was bullied. Why? Because she was part of the LGBTQ community. At one point, the bullying got so bad that it drove her to almost take her own life. She was my best friend. Many people like to claim that the LGBTQ community has gained momentum in the sense of equality. And the people who say that tend to say that because of the 2015 Supreme Court case hearing Overhaul versus Hodges, in which a 5-4 decision led to couples of the same sex to get married. While I'm in no way here standing in front of you trying to diminish the importance of that historic case, what I am standing here in front of you telling you is that the fight for gay rights is far from over and that the LGBTQ community is still suffering at the hands of hate crimes today. One recent example that I'll be talking about is one that happened less than a year ago, 8 months ago. On the night of June 11th, 2016, there was a shooting at Pulse, a gay nightclub located in Orlando, Florida. On that tragic night, Mina Justice was awakened by a series of text messages sent by her son, Eddie. The first text message said, "Mommy, I love you." Seconds later, she received another series of text messages. It said, "In club, they shooting." As Mina Justice read these text messages, she became distraught, as any mother would. distraught with the idea if she was ever going to get to hold her baby boy in her arms again. Minutes later, she received another series of texts. They read, "Trapped in bathroom, he's coming, I'm gonna die." Those were the last text messages that Mina Justice ever received from her son. The following morning, Eddie's name, along with 9 others, were released by the news confirming their deaths. 53 people were hurt, 39 people were pronounced dead at the scene, and another 11 people died fighting for their lives on the way to the hospital, bringing the total loss of life to 50. This became one of the worst attacks on American soil since 9/11, and it became the deadliest shooting in United States history. Although it is extreme, this is just one example how hate can manifest itself and affect the LGBTQ community. Whether we like to admit it or not, politics play a huge role in our day-to-day lives. Whether we're Republican, Democrat, or somewhere in between, it's hard to deny that the current political climate is shaping discourses in the LGBTQ community. For example, when Donald Trump was asked if he would elect a Supreme Court justice who would overturn the Same-Sex Marriage Ruling Act, he responded, "Yes, oh yes, I would strongly consider that." If that weren't bad enough, our current vice president has been recorded saying, "Resources should be directed toward those institutions which provide assistance to those seeking to change their sexual behavior." Meaning that our current vice president believes in conversion therapy camps. And for those of you who might not know what conversion therapy camps are, they're when someone takes a person who's part of the LGBTQ community and forces them to adhere to society's norms by any means necessary, including electric shock therapy. And that is what our current vice president believes in, and that is what the second-hand man to the most powerful man in our country believes in. Bella Stoy, a teen who was actually admitted to a conversion therapy camp, tweeted, "They even encourage suicide because at least we wouldn't be gay anymore. Jamie, the only 13-year-old I met during my time there, killed himself during my second week. He was the first I saw die. It was enough to make 27 people kill themselves in just 6 months." Another way that the LGBTQ community is still being affected today tragically revolves around the death of Layla Alcorn. When Layla was born, she was born Joshua Ryan Alcorn, meaning that she was transgender. When she was just 16 years of age, she bravely decided to ask her parents if she could undergo transition therapy treatment. What that meant was that she wanted to begin transition into the gender that she identified with. Her parents said no. Instead, they sent her to a conversion therapy camp, the same type of camp that I had previously mentioned, and the same type of camp that had made people want to kill themselves. Then tragically, on December 28th, 2014, Layla Alcorn committed suicide by walking in front of an incoming semi-truck on a busy highway. Her suicide note reads, "If you're reading this, it means that I've committed suicide and obviously failed to delete this post from my queue. Please don't be sad, it's for the better. The life I would have lived isn't worth living in because I'm transgender. Either I live the rest of my life as a lonely man who wished he were a woman, or live my life as a lonely woman who hates herself. There is no winning. My death needs to mean something. My death needs to be counted in the number of transgender people who commit suicide this year. I want someone to look at that number and say, that's f***ed up, and fix it. Fix society, please." So where does this leave us? According to research in the Education Prevention website, 30% of gay children attempt suicide near the age of 15 years old, and people are already thinking of suicide. And research also shows that 8 million adults in the United States identify with being lesbian, gay, or even bisexual. So chances are of you going to work with, you going to school with, you befriending, or you even going on the bus and sitting next to a person who's part of this community are fairly high. So I beg you, before you reach for judgment, before you fall back onto stereotypes, I beg you to please think of Layla Alcorn's story. An innocent young girl whose bullying, tormenting, and isolation drove her to commit suicide. Now, I'd please like to have a moment of silence for Andrew, Gregory, Daniel, Joanna, Lawrence, Eddie, Jamie, and Layla, and any other person whose life was taken from this world too fast because of hate crimes. first step in fixing a problem is realizing that there is a problem. If we work together to recognize that the fight for gay rights isn't over, and to love one another despite who we choose to love, then children won't lose their parents. Parents won't lose their children. And people won't lose the people that they love. Deshaun Stokes said, "Terror doesn't change people from gay to straight. It just hurts innocent people." Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. Next up, we have Hannah Godfrey, and she's a sophomore from Raleigh, North Carolina, majoring in psychology. So please welcome Hannah to the stage.
So imagine you guys studied insanely hard for a test in something crazy. Let's just make something up. Physochem-bioneurology. But not only did you study insanely hard, you had to, because the results of the test decides whether or not you'll graduate. You pulled 3 all-nighters for this test, and maybe some of you don't have to imagine that. But when you walk out of the exam room, you're at a loss. Not because you think you bombed it, but because you have no idea how you did. You have to wait a day for grades to be posted, and that day seems so far away, but when it comes, and you're getting messages from your friends all sharing their success or failure, you can't bring yourself to check as you learn. You keep telling yourself, "I'll check tomorrow," but suddenly final grades are out, and as you learn isn't even operational anymore. And you still don't know if you'll be throwing your cap alongside your peers. Because as long as you don't know if you passed or failed, both are equally plausible. You can continue on having not passed but not quite failed either, without having to subject yourself to a truth that could potentially destroy you. Now stick with me, guys. I'm going to talk about physics. I know it's rough, but I promise, just stay with me, it comes back around. So the first experiment I'm going to tell you about is a thought experiment. And it's a relatively simple and well-known experiment you may have heard of. A thought experiment means that it was never actually conducted, just theorized in a lab. And it's set up like this. There's a cat locked in a bunker with a vial of poisonous gas that has a 50% chance of leaking in the next 5 minutes. After those 5 minutes are up, the cat has an equal chance of being alive or dead, right? May seem a bit rudimentary. But from the perspective of quantum physics, it can be argued that until the bunker is opened, the cat is equally alive and dead. The cat possesses superposition, meaning it's in 2 physical states at the same time. And it's in this liminal space of undefinedness that psychology and physics intertwine. And it takes the observation of the theoretical observer to identify whether this cat is alive or dead. The next experiment I'm going to tell you about is one of the most intriguing phenomena in physics. It's called the double slit experiment. And there are a couple moving parts to this experiment, but it's consistently set up with an electron firing device on your right side, then a screen in the center with either 1 or 2 slits down it, and an observation screen on the far, well, your right side, where the measurements are observed. So first, physicists shot electrons towards the sheet with 1 single slit down it. What was measured on the other side was a single line, so no surprises here. Next, they moved on to using waves. They pushed waves towards the sheet with a single slit down it, and they measured the intensity that they hit the observation screen. Here, they hit the observation screen with the radiating intensity that waves travel, with the most intense place being at the center, and the measurement lessening as you move outward. Next, they moved to using 2 slits instead of 1. I know this looks daunting, but really only what's going on here is the waves are intersecting with each other and creating an interference pattern. This is what happens when the trough of one wave cancels out with the peak of another. Kind of like if you dropped 2 stones in the water next to each other and watched the pattern they created. But everything was acting the way it should have been up until now, but this is where things got really weird. Next, physicists shot single point particle electrons at a sheet with 2 slits down it. What was expected is that there would be 2 lines, like the first time, only doubled. However, what was observed was an interference pattern. But this made no physical sense. How could a point particle behave like a wave? But they're physicists, right? So they're smart. And they're going to catch these pesky electrons. So they put a camera right by the slit so they could tell exactly which electron was going through which slit. And they ran the test again. And this time they found 2 parallel lines. The electrons had behaved differently, as if they were aware that they were being watched. Physicists were confounded, so they did something really, really scientific. They snuck around to the camera and unplugged it. All stealthy-like, so the electrons wouldn't know about it. And they ran the test again. And they found an interference pattern. Because even with their super scientific solution, they couldn't get past those miscreant electrons. The takeaway from this is that these electrons, like Schrödinger's cat, possess superposition. And in both cases, it was the act of observing by the human experimenter that collapsed that superposition, that found the cat's heartbeat or didn't, or found that point particles don't behave like point particles unless there's someone there to make sure they don't break the physical laws of the universe. But why should you guys care? Unless you're a total nerd, this experiment was only mildly interesting. But here's where it loops back, right? As long as you don't know what state something is in, you can imagine observing both states. And no one has explained this quite so eloquently as the author John Green. According to Green, the reason Schrödinger's cat is so famous is not because it's a terribly important thought experiment, but because A, it's relatively easy to understand, and B, metaphorically resonant with a lot of people. Like for a lot of people, the whole pleasure of being in a state of unknowing is that as long as you don't know all possible outcomes, you kind of feel as if they're happening. When you press for an outcome or open the box, you get one outcome, but depending on how much you want that cat to be alive, the risk can feel like it's not worth taking. Uncertainty is incredibly powerful. And if there's any specific population that knows this best, it's college students, because we have no idea what the hell we're doing most of the time. All right, show of hands right now. Who is undecided in their major? And which one of you, or how many of you picked a major specifically because it's broad enough? It could be used in a myriad of disciplines in a variety of ways. For those of you that open up DegreeWorks and see undecided, it can be a bit stressful, right? Yet some of you specifically choose a major because of the uncertainty. Take a more liberal arts route like psychology or management because of the options it gives you after you graduate. Uncertainty is okay and can even be advantageous if you're unafraid of recognizing and embracing it. Uncertainty is also something that's woven into our space-time. It is imperative to the universe on the smallest of scales, and the electrons that create us and everything we know, and spread across our lifetimes on a macro scale that we don't need a microscope to perceive, because we don't observe these outcomes in a lab like we would at the double slit experiment. We consciously live them. Physics and psychology are connected by this uncertainty. Physics and psychology are connected by this uncertainty. It underlies our physical states and also the decisions that we make. And we've all done this. We've all found comfort in uncertainty, and we've all purposefully kept ourselves in a state of unknowing because of the fear of what knowing could do to us. It's what kept you from checking as you learn in that crazy bio, physio, neuro, whatever class. It's what's keeping you from asking out that special someone. Maybe it made you throw your acceptance letter from Appalachian State at your sibling because you were too nervous to open it yourself. It's also what has driven you to pursue answers, ask the difficult questions, and seek them in others. Like, is Garfield dead? Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So for our last talk of the evening, we have another Hannah coming up, but Hannah Lamb this time. She is a sophomore public relations major from Cary, North Carolina. So please welcome her to the stage.
Okay, let's jump. Oh, no, not there yet. Let's jump right in. So the strong relationship between words and images is fascinating. We live in a society that is so accustomed to stereotypes and generalizations that it only takes one phrase, or in some cases one simple word, to conjure up a really detailed image in your brain. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you about one rather taboo word that we can't seem to get away from as a society, that conjures up some pretty strong images, no matter what your views are. And this was going to be a big surprise, but you've already seen it, and that word is feminism. Oh, goodness. Not there yet. Oh my. But yes, that word is feminism, and I know it's everybody's favorite F word. It's super awesome. But regardless of how you feel, you probably already have an image of what feminism means to you, or what a feminist looks like to you. And now I would like to put the disclaimer out there that I am not a mind reader. I'm working on it, but I'm not there yet. But let's pretend for a moment that I am. I'm going to guess what you might be thinking about when you think about feminism and the people you associate with that concept. You might be thinking about politics. There we go, we're on track this time. You might be thinking about some, oh goodness, I'm so sorry. You might be thinking about politics. You might be thinking about women in our legislative bodies of government that are usually just dominated by men who are passionate about certain issues, who use their voice to advocate for what they believe in. So you might think of Hillary Clinton, or you might think of my personal favorite, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm like in love with her. You might think of Michelle Obama, or as much as she would hate to be given the term feminist, you might even be thinking about Tomi Lahren, because let's face it, she obviously loves to advocate for what she believes in. Or you might not be thinking about politics, because let's face it, who wants to keep talking about them anymore? You might be thinking about celebrities when you think about feminism. You might be thinking about women like Emma Watson, or Lena Dunham, Amy Poehler, or the Queen Bee herself. And now I know celebrities sometimes get a bad rep for claiming that they're feminists because they do come from that celebrity status and the privilege that comes along with that. But I think it's important to note that these celebrities have made conversations about women a part of their industry. Words are really hard today. They've made it a part of their industry, which I think just emphasizes the importance that they think women have in the world. Or maybe you're sitting there not thinking about a specific name of a person, but you're just thinking about a type of person that you could put really any name with. Here are some of the types you might be thinking about. And these are a little extreme, but I think they're commonly referred to. You might be thinking about women who participate in protests with either somewhat calm signs or very extreme signs, or lack of clothing to prove their point. You might think of the famous bra-burning hippies, or you might be thinking of that one friend you have on Facebook who always is just ready to fire off her beliefs in a comment section, and you think about unfriending her every time you log on, but you just can't seem to do it yet. Stay friends with her. You might learn something from her. If you have any takeaway, that should be it tonight. But I can tell by y'all's reactions and facial expressions that I'm pretty in touch with my cultural stereotypes, so I'll give myself a pat on the back for that. But we also just proved that we all have our biases about feminism, whether we want to admit it or not. Now, this may not come as a surprise to you since this is what I'm presenting on, but I would describe myself as a feminist. But I would also describe myself as a Christian. Those are two identities that I hold very strongly and believe very passionately about both of them. And this is an identity that's not commonly talked about. Again, I'm not a mind reader, so I might be wrong, but from what I could tell, nobody was out here thinking, I wonder when that chick is going to throw up a picture of Jesus up there, because you know what, he really just championed gender equality. Like, when is she going to talk about that? It's even laughable, because that's how little we talk about it today. In fact, the idea of a faith-based feminist is pretty rare, which shows that we as a society tend to view broad social concepts with a narrow lens. And this is facilitated by those generalizations and those stereotypes that we're all so used to. In fact, social justice and organized religion are often seen as mutually exclusive. I've personally experienced this by having my friends who I can talk about gender issues with never bring up religion in the conversation. Or my friends that I would go to church with say, there's no way you could be one of those crazy feminists. Like, how could you even associate with them? Because that's how crazy this idea is to us. But I personally think they pair really well together, and I'm going to explain to you why. Let's start off by looking at definitions. So now, this quote might seem familiar to you if you have jammed out to Beyonce's song Flawless lately. This quote, taken from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk called Why We Should All Be Feminists, which if you have 30 minutes to spare, you should go watch it. It's incredible. Is featured in that song, and it says this: feminist, the person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. And I think the most important word in this definition that drives the entire meaning of what she's talking about is equality. Because equality is at the core of understanding feminism. It's at the core of understanding a lot of social justice concepts. And believe it or not, it's also at the core of understanding Christianity and what Christians believe. In fact, feminism and Christianity, to me, are concepts that are rooted in pretty parallel values. There are more common threads than just that one. And in fact, I truly believe that feminist principles were first embodied by Jesus Christ himself. And you can see those practiced throughout recordings listed in the Bible. And ideally, these principles should still be embodied by evangelical Christians today. And I'm going to talk to you about that. So now when I say the term Christian values, that might be another phrase that conjures up an image in your mind because it has a pretty strong stigma. When you think about Christian values, you might think of those friends that you might call hypocritical. Or you might think of people that practice a really shallow faith that exists only in a church building. Or you might think of people that wear a label that they believe gives them a right to practice superiority and exclusion. But true, authentic Christian values are so much larger than those stereotypes. And they embody practices of forgiveness and grace, mercy, unconditional love, equality, and justice. In fact, the entire faith of Christianity rests on the idea of equality and that there's an even playing field. The gospel that is preached by Christians says that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, gave his life so that everybody, regardless of your experience, your age, ethnic background, social status, political affiliation, perceived morality level, and even your gender expression can have access to God's gifts of forgiveness and grace and salvation. The Apostle Paul in the Bible clearly lays this out in Romans chapter 3, verse 21. And in case you're wondering, for both of these Bible verses, I'm using the English Standard Version translation of the Bible, if that's important to you. But Romans 3:21 says, "But now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe, for there is no distinction." This clearly demonstrates that God's love transcends all social borders. In fact, God himself advocates in the Bible for his followers to practice social justice. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, this verse simply states, "Learn to do good, seek justice, help the oppressed." To me, that's pretty clear and simple. However, today in our conversations about organized religion, we commonly think of Christians as those believers who misinterpret the Bible and practice hate and exclusion instead of love and inclusion. But as I've tried to show you here, God's plan does not embody that, but rather it embodies love and equal treatment regardless of those social boundaries and labels that we have. And love and equality is also at the root of feminism, which is another thing that I feel like is often taken out of our conversations about that topic. Now, feminism has historically been broken down into waves because of different time periods and what was going on then. But throughout all of those waves, the core principle of equity has always existed. And now the dates on these are a little debated over just because timing is difficult and everything, but these are just some commonly accepted time periods for popular women's movements. First wave feminism was primarily focused on obtaining voting rights for women. The second wave of feminism, which followed after, focused a lot more on women's rights in their private lives, and they tackled issues that still exist today, like domestic violence, sexual harassment, workplace rights, and reproductive rights. It started to bring these issues into conversations about women and questioned what it means for women in these areas of their lives. The third wave of feminism, which some debate is still going on today, but that's a whole other conversation for another time, it expanded upon these first two waves by questioning if all women's experiences were universal, which means that this focused on equity specifically for women of color and women of a lower socioeconomic status. And this introduced the concept of intersectionality. The idea that there's not one specific way to be a woman because women's other identities and values they hold impact their experiences as a woman. So I think that's pretty important to talk about. But when we think about these waves, we don't always see the equity behind them. Instead, we commonly today think about feminists as people who are greedy and just hate men. That's where the term feminazi comes from, which is another thing I hate and another thing I could spend a whole 10 minutes talking about, but that's okay. But I think it's important to see that historically, and even still today, the goal of feminism as a whole is not to establish a matriarchy where women are superior and men are oppressed as a result. But instead, feminism is about celebrating gender as a status characteristic that makes someone unique and makes somebody worthy of respect and love and equal treatment. Now, much like feminism, Christianity isn't just applicable to just one specific group of people, but rather they both include principles that can be embraced by people of all walks of life and all experiences. And these two concepts are clearly rooted in the pursuit of a better, more just, and equal society, which, in my opinion, makes sense that there are several biblical accounts of people practicing love and equal treatment towards women. In fact, Jesus Christ himself, I think, can be described as one of the first recorded advocates for gender equality. In his ministry here on earth, he served men and women equally. Now, when Jesus lived in the Middle East, the culture that was dominant there, and in some areas still exists today, was highly patriarchal and extremely oppressive towards not just women, but people of a lower social status, or people who didn't fit into categories of privileged identities. But again, that's another conversation. Right now, I'm mostly going to focus on women. But when Jesus interacted with women during his ministry on earth, he defied those cultural norms. He performed miracles for women as readily as he did for men. He taught women the Word of God and included them in spiritual conversations and discussions about religion, which today might not seem kind of weird because obviously I'm a woman up here talking about religion. But back then, women were excluded from those conversations because they were seen as inferior and less intelligent. So the fact that Jesus went out of his way to do that just shows how much compassion he had for them. To him, their identities that they held didn't change his perception of them. They mattered because it made them who they are, but who they were to him were people who were worthy of respect and love. Author Philip Yancey once said, "For women and other oppressed people, Jesus turned upside down the accepted wisdom of the day." And I think that's a great way to phrase it because that's exactly what he did. One of the best examples I could think of for this from Scripture is from John chapter 8. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but if you have time later when you go home to avoid doing some homework, go read John chapter 8. It's really cool. In this story that's laid out in the Bible, it talks about how these religious leaders brought a woman before Jesus who committed adultery and was about to be charged for that, which in that time, in that society, and in that culture was was subject to really extreme punishment. And the punishment they were about to inflict on her was death by stoning. And so these leaders gathered this woman, put her in front of Jesus, and they started to gather stones that they were going to use to end her life. But Jesus turned to those men and said to him, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone." Now, naturally, these men started to put down their stones and disappear because of their own personal convictions. And later, the woman was left with Jesus, who was the only person with the proper authority to cast a stone at her. But when Jesus looked at the woman and said, "Has anyone condemned you?" and she said, "No," he simply said, "Neither do I. Now go forth and sin no more." I think it's important to note here that Jesus didn't have those men withhold that punishment from her because she was a weak and fragile woman. The concept of her gender didn't even come up in that conversation. He simply used moral reasoning and justification. In my opinion, the same reasoning and justification he would have used if a man were in that situation. To Jesus, he showed that gender equality isn't a matter of changing policies because women are weak or inferior or deserve special treatment. But he brought up the conversation of feminism and gender equality being okay because it was simply doing the right thing. It was simply treating somebody with the respect and honor that they deserved. And there are several other accounts throughout the Bible where Jesus showed in his ministry that these concepts are not just correct from a spiritual standpoint, because I don't know what beliefs you brought into this room tonight, but he showed that they are also correct from an ethical standpoint. He showed that you can justify them through just wanting to do the right thing and wanting to treat people with respect. And this message of equity is often forgotten when we talk about Christianity today and when we talk about feminism. Sarah Bessey, the author of the book Jesus Feminist, once said this: "Perhaps feminism is more about the core truth behind it than a label." And I think this is so true, not just for feminism, but for other labels we all wear. You might not wear the label of being a Christian. You might not wear the label of being a feminist, but there probably is something that you value, that identifies you, that's super important to you, that you have really strong convictions about. And obviously, that truth to you is a lot more important than the label that you wear. And these labels and generalizations hurt our conversations that we have about social issues. And that's because stereotypes and stigmas are limiting, and they don't really leave room for intersectionality. Like I talked about earlier, it's kind of unheard of for my Christian friends to think that I could be a feminist and advocate for women, and vice versa. And personally, it's a little uncomfortable for me to stand here talking to you about it because it's so unheard of. And you might experience this in your own lives with whatever identities you hold and whatever values you hold dear to you. But the important thing is that your values have a meaning to you, whatever they are. And these values impact our social and political discourse. And I truly believe that effective social and political discourse has the ability to change the world. But if in these conversations we're reliant on generalizations and we don't take time to ask people about what they believe or the truth that they feel behind the labels they wear, then we will not make any of that progress that we desire to make. So my encouragement to you tonight is to have those uncomfortable conversations. If you don't understand why somebody thinks some way because of how you perceive them, just ask them. Usually when you ask people about things they're passionate about, they won't be hesitant to share that with you. You might learn something new about them and something new about yourself. And you might stop using those generalizations and stigmas to label people and look past that label to the core truth behind it. And I truly believe that as we move towards a more genuine expression of our identities, whatever that is for you, for me, that's being a Christian and also being a feminist. You can fill in the blank with whatever identities are important to you. But I feel that if we move towards a more authentic expression of those identities, then we'll one day be able to wear our labels with pride instead of shame. Thank you.
Hi again. So we know it's hot in here. We don't want to keep you too much longer, but we did just want to have a few closing remarks. First of all, thank you all for coming again. We really appreciate having you here, whether it was for class or just because it does mean a lot to us. I do also want to thank Dr. Richards. Be honest, didn't know what to think about the new kid on the block at first, but he has been an incredible resource and a wonderful person to work with, so thank you. Okay, and then also, lastly, and most importantly, we would love to thank all of these wonderful speakers. I've been doing this for 3 years, I think now. I can't count. 3 years, and each year, I love doing it so much because all of the talks are always inspiring, and that is, of course, true for this evening as well. Thank you all for the very hard work that you put in. This was amazing. Thank you.
So now you are free to exit the room and enjoy catering by Stick Boy and Ishi Catering. Just make sure that you don't waste any food.